Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Election Detection. My name is Charlie Cutro, and this is my co-host.
Johnny Robertson.
And tonight we're going to be looking at some elections from around the world, taking a look at the parties, the issues, the campaigns, and everything going on in global politics.
All right, so tonight on the docket, we're going to open up with a story on Montenegro and its upcoming election following a couple years of sliding from democracy. After a short break, we'll move on to the United States and their recently concluded national conventions for the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Moving on from there, we're going to cover a story of Trinidad and Tobago and their recently concluded election, and we will announce their results. And finally, after another break, we will have a story of some party races in Canada, and ending off with a story about the new Brunswick general election and a special guest star.
For our first story tonight, we're heading to Europe and the Balkan Peninsula for the 2020 Montenegro parliamentary elections. These elections could mark a turning point in Montenegrin politics following the 2016 elections, when the entire opposition began to boycott parliamentary sittings. This means that a total 39 of 81 seats in parliament have remained empty. The opposition also called for parliamentary elections to be held in 2018 along with the presidential election. This did not occur, and former Prime Minister Milo Đukanović of the ruling Democratic Party of Socialists, henceforth known as DPS, was elected to the seat of president. He was elected in the first round with 54% of the vote. In the same election, Draginja Vuksanović made history as the first female presidential candidate in the country's history, but ended with only 8% of the vote. The 2016 parliamentary election was also rocked by accusations of a suspected coup d'etat. 20 Montenegrin and Serbian nationals were arrested as part of a plot to attack parliament and assassinate now President Milo Đukanović. 2 Russian nationals were also involved, and the suspected cause of the plot was as a last-ditch effort to prevent Montenegro from joining NATO, which was strongly opposed by Serbia and Russia. The Russian government has denied any involvement. The Moscow-based Russian Institute for Strategic Studies, or RIS, which has close ties to the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, the SVR, was mentioned by mass media as one of the organizations involved in devising the coup plot. In early November 2017, Russian President Vladimir Putin sacked the RIS director, Leonid P. Reshnikov, a ranking officer in the SVR. Montenegro has been slipping further down the democracy index for several years, now firmly being classified as a hybrid regime because of declining standards in government, justice, and elections and media freedom. The president and prime minister, Duško Marković, are both of the DPS party, which has held power since the introduction of a multi-party system in 1990. There is no term limit for prime ministers, but presidents are restricted to 2 4-year terms. In its June 2018 report, issued after the presidential election, the OSCE's office, that's the Organization for Security and Cooperations in Europe, for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, called for election reforms in Montenegro and for more integrity, impartiality, and professionalism in election administration. Protests against corruption in the DPS-led government started in February 2019 after the revelation of footage and documents that appeared to implicate top officials in obtaining funds for the ruling party. On March 30th, all 39 opposition MPs signed an agreement for the future proposed by the protest organizers, in which they promised to boycott the 2020 elections if they were deemed irregular. In May of 2020, the protest organizers called for a boycott of the elections on the 30th of August, along with some opposition parties, claiming the elections would not be held under fair conditions. The EU-backed Board for Electoral System Reform, which both the government and opposition participated in, failed in December of 2019 after the opposition left the board sessions in protest at the government passing a controversial law on religion, accusing the ruling party of inciting ethnic hatred and unrest. Freedom House stated that years of increasing state capture and abuse of power and strongman tactics employed by long-term Prime Minister Duško Marković and President Milo Đukanović had tipped the country over the edge, and for the first time since 2003, Montenegro was no longer categorized as a democracy. The report emphasized the unequal electoral process, cases of political unrest, negative developments related to judicial independence, media freedoms, as well as a series of unresolved cases of corruption within the DPS-led government. Despite repeated demands from the opposition, NGO sector, and the EU-backed institutions for the professionalism and neutralization of institutions controlling the electoral process, they are still under the de facto control of the ruling DPS-led coalition. Alrighty, there's definitely a lot to unpack going on in Montenegro now. We've got a slide into what's being called a semi-authoritarian regime. We've got potential election meddling. Actually, I think in this case it's pretty well set election meddling. It just depends
Pretty well
whether it's
confirmed, yeah.
whether it's entirely domestic or there's some international stuff going on as well. We have an attempted coup d'état attempt. There's a lot going on there in the last few years.
Yeah. It's crazy to think about because you don't see a lot of this sort of stuff on the news quite as much. And then this is some pretty big stuff happening. I mean, the whole point of us doing this election detection series is to put a spotlight on, other countries around the world that are having elections in the next year or so, and the ones that don't get a spotlight quite often in the news. And I mean, this has been a saga going on for a few years now, and going into researching this is the first time I've seen a lot of this sort of stuff.
Exactly.
I'm no poli-sci major by any means, but it's still quite interesting.
Exactly, and when you think about especially where Montenegro is, where it's a state of former Yugoslavia, there's definitely a lot that's been going on there, even just within the last, well, particularly within the last like 40 years. Because I mean, we can't forget the Yugoslav Civil War back in the 90s, and it was only 25 years ago that Sarajevo was being victim to the longest siege in modern military history. So it's easy to think of, oh, well, with Europe and the EU, it's one of the most stable places on the planet. But then when you think it's really, really not that long ago that even we had the Yugoslav Civil War, the break of the USSR, and even if you go back a little further, World War II, it really kind of puts it into perspective for you of how recent the past actually was and how much work there is still to do to make sure that there's not a backslide into it.
Yeah, following this whole election, you can still see, slight hints or the ghosts of the previous governments, particularly when it was a part of the Eastern Bloc.
Yes, exactly.
Looking at these are some running themes that seem to have plagued former Soviet countries since the Soviet Union collapsed.
Yeah, and it definitely, when they're talking about the increasing capture of state power by the prime minister and the president, it really does have a lot of shades of Tito's rise in Yugoslavia.
Yeah.
So you really have to look at it and think if we're not careful globally through the next several years, we could start seeing parts of Europe or different places on the planet start sliding back into sort of more authoritarian regimes and
quasi-fascists.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It really goes to show that, well, the world is definitely a lot more of it's sort of lifted out of fascism and authoritarian regimes and whatnot from the 20th century, that there's still a lot of work to do, and we really, really can't afford to become complacent at any point in the future.
Yeah. And as we see, many of the Montenegrin people are trying very hard not to become the next victims of fascism, seeing all these protests and stuff.
Yeah, and what really makes me think of is the state that Montenegro is in right now. It really feels like it could be a stepping block to the state that Belarus is in at the moment.
Yeah,
and we've definitely seen a lot of news coming out of there with the news of Lukashenko's recent re-election and how that system is totally rigged.
Oh, yeah. And seeing so much power put on only a few people in the government, showing how ineffective it can be to try and execute anything in the government, particularly following the Beirut explosions.
Exactly. So it's definitely going to be one to keep in mind. We're going to cut to some quick messages here, and then we'll be right back with our next story.
The future of animals everywhere is at risk. In the last 40 years, over half of the world's animal populations have disappeared. Biodiversity is in crisis, and we need to do something now to reverse this alarming trend. Earth Rangers knows that no one cares more about animals than our children, and by providing them with the tools and the inspiration to take action, kids can make a real difference to the survival of wildlife. Already, thousands of children across Canada are joining forces as Earth Rangers to help protect animals and their habitats. To get your child involved or to make a donation, please visit earthrangers.com.
Providing airtime to independent artists everywhere. CHMR FM.
So our next story tonight follows the United States and the recently concluded Republican conventions and Democratic conventions. As the United States reaches the penultimate month in its long-anticipated November 3rd presidential election, the parties have finalized their candidates and platforms. At the Democratic National Convention in the third week of August, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were confirmed as running mates for the Democratic White House bid. This being Biden's third attempt at the presidency, following an aborted attempt in 1988 over plagiarism allegations of ripping off the British Labour Party leader, Neil Kinnock, and a second run in 2008 that morphed into his vice presidency. The RNC has had some trouble finding its footing this year. Originally being planned in Charlotte, North Carolina, the GOP pulled the conference after North Carolina rejected demands that it be allowed to go ahead without social distancing. The conference was then rebooked to Jacksonville, Florida, and the conference was eventually returned in a hybrid online/in-person format to Charlotte. Incumbents Donald Trump and Mike Pence were confirmed as Republican nominees, and this came on the heels of some speculation that Pence may not be included in Trump's bid. This was due to the appearance of former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley with Trump at a number of campaign events. It was suggested that Trump may attempt to counteract Biden's pick of Harris as his running mate by also running with a woman. Trump currently polls behind Biden in the double digits, with most important toss-up states being Texas, Ohio, Georgia, and North Carolina. Early voting begins September 18th in Minnesota, South Dakota, and Wyoming, and follows suit in 34 other states and the District of Columbia between September 18th and October 29th. Alrighty. So we've definitely had some interesting developments from the last two conventions, particularly with the establishing of Biden and Trump's respective running mates.
Exactly. And it's definitely come as an interesting race for the vice president nomination in the Democratic Party. And I believe originally it was 9 possibilities were listed. And there were people wondering if it was going to be a former Democratic presidential candidate that ended up with the vice presidential nomination, because Elizabeth Warren and Amy Klobuchar were also options in the vice presidential race.
Yes, exactly. Definitely some really good choices throughout the board. There was really,
definitely.
It was interesting that this time around there really wasn't a clear choice for Biden to choose.
Yes. And I've definitely wondered with this being Biden's third attempt at the presidency, and there's actually been some reports this time around of he's been accused of plagiarizing none other than former NDP leader Jack Layton in one of his speeches. Yes, one of his closing pieces in his speech at the Democratic National Convention actually was very similar to a passage from Biden, from Jack Layton's final letter, which
funny.
It was the passage in which he's talking about light is stronger than darkness, love is stronger than hate, everything like that. And I have wondered about that, because it would seem, it's very inspirational. And if it was based off of Jack Layton's letter, then he should have been credited. But I also do have to wonder in this case, as it wasn't as close as the speech between Biden and Kinnock were, if it was just really accidental, because that is sort of a general trope in speeches.
Oh, yeah. And we've been seeing a lot of phrases like those spread around the internet recently anyway.
Oh, absolutely. Especially in the current, not just political climate, but global climate with everything that's going on. It's definitely a sentiment that's been shared on social media and by a lot of figures in the public eye.
It's a good message to hear.
It is. And you can say it's a trope. It is, but it is nice to hear it. It is nice to know that people believe it.
Yeah. Now,
at the moment, it's nice to see Biden polling so far ahead of Trump, because definitely the States is in need of a switch in management, particularly looking at the coronavirus response.
Ooh.
And I just wanted to take a look at a couple of figures that I found the other day, which I believe highlight the exact problem in the States at the moment. And that was the statistics of the number of Republicans and the number of Democrats who believe that the COVID response has been thoroughly successful, and the number of Republicans who believe that the number of COVID deaths is acceptable at 170,000 is 57%. Yeah, pretty much. 73% of Republicans polled also believe that the coronavirus response, despite being the worst country on the planet for coronavirus response and for number of cases, well, not necessarily for response, but definitely for how badly it spiraled out of control, is 73% voted that it was going well versus 38% of Democrats that voted it was going well. So I would definitely like to see Biden win this election in order to start putting the U.S. on a more positive course towards dealing with the current pandemic.
For sure.
Yeah.
If they can't go back and fix the mistakes they did in the very beginning, which they obviously can't, that's not how time works.
Yeah.
Then at least maybe they can change their course of action now before it gets any worse.
And I think with the case with the RNC and it's moving around for a while definitely demonstrated that the current administration has no intention of doing that, given they originally pulled their convention out of North Carolina because of COVID regulations being enforced and not wanting to comply with them.
Yeah, exactly.
Which
it's really kind of gross to hear about.
Yeah, exactly. It's when it doesn't matter if you want to have a fully attended convention or whatnot. When you're campaigning against face masks and against social distancing and everything that's scientifically proven and statistically proven in other countries to work perfectly, it's reckless endangerment of your own population at that point.
Yeah. And in this case, your own voter base.
Yeah, exactly. If your voters and your supporters and everything means so little to you that you're willing to have, I mean, sure, they're talking about, oh, well, the virus only has a 1% death rate. But I mean, if you're in a room and you're putting, say, 5,000 people in the room, that's still a decent number of them that are not going to be walking out of there doing well.
That's like 50.
Yeah, exactly.
And that doesn't even include the number who get infected and get sick but don't pass on.
Exactly, the asymptomatic carriers that then go and spread it around to other people. And that's, to me, that's what it comes down to, is you can say, oh, there's this and there's that and there's the other thing, but that's like the most telling sign to me, is if your voter base means so little to you that their lives are effectively meaningless as long as you get to stand on your stage and have screaming and cheering at you for 5 minutes, then you don't deserve to be on the stage.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Whereas the Democratic convention was definitely an interesting one this year, and it's sort of different approach, being televised and being specifically designed to be televised and recorded from various areas around the country with, you could almost call it the superstar cast of the Democratic Party of former presidents and former presidential nominees and everything like that.
Oh, yeah. It was quite a spectacle.
Oh, yeah.
And honestly, the way things go, I can almost see a spot for conventions like that happening in the future.
Oh, definitely. I believe after the pandemic is over that it will probably be sort of a hybrid of the two. If there will be the large in-person convention, but there'll probably be sort of more televised and more media online for people to interact with, because it's definitely a way to reach out and reach an audience that wouldn't have otherwise been able to attend or wouldn't have otherwise been engaged. And it's definitely a good way to grab more voters, especially with the younger demographics that are just coming up and deciding, okay, I'm going to vote for whichever side. It's definitely a way to reach out and address them.
Yeah, exactly.
And for the next story on the ballot tonight, we're going to be taking a look south to the Caribbean, heading to the nation of Trinidad and Tobago.
Yes, sir, Charlie. The 2020 general election was held on August 10th, with incumbent Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley retaining his seat with his People's National Movement Party, the oldest party in Trinidad, who also retained their majority. Trinidad's political system has both a president and a prime minister, and the prime minister holds executive power, and the president acts in a similar capacity to a governor general. This practice dates back to before Trinidad became a republic in 1976. The current president, elected in 2018 and halfway through a 5-year term, is Paula May Weeks, who took the title of their first female president. There are currently only 2 parties represented in Trinidad's parliament, the ruling People's National Movement, or the PNM, and the opposition United National Congress, the UNC, which is headed by former Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar. This is the first election to only secure seats for two parties since the 2007 election, won by the PNM and PM Patrick Manning. The 2010 election was called 2 years early and resulted in a shift of power to the UNC and the representation of four parties in Parliament: the PNM, UNC, Congress of the People, or the COP, and the Tobago Organization of the People, the TOP. The UNC, COP, and TOP all represent the People's Partnership Coalition. The 2015 election resulted in the PNM defeating the coalition, pushing TOP out of Parliament, and reducing the COP to one riding in St. Augustine. 2020 was a close election, with the PNM taking 22 of the 41 seats, and the UNC taking 19. The COP being pushed out of St. Augustine by the UNC. All parties in question are politically center-left-leaning. 1 week after the election, the UNC conceded defeat, stating, "After some days of reflection and monitoring of the progress of the election recount process, I am satisfied that the people have spoken and that Dr. Rowley and his party shall form the new government of Trinidad and Tobago," said UNC political leader Kamla Persad-Bissessar. The main issues facing the reformed government and PM Rowley are the pandemic, shoring up a faltering economy due to low energy pricing, and trade and immigration issues relating to the political crisis in nearby Venezuela. So yeah, that's basically been the recent election in Trinidad and Tobago. And one thing that I find most impressive about this is that just the lack of animosity between the parties is quite fascinating, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. And especially with the two different parties in question, they actually are known to work together a fair bit, as their voter base is known to fall along fairly specific cultural lines, with people of African descent, the Afro-Trinidadian community, tending to vote for the People's National Movement, and the Indo-Trinidadian support tending to come for the United National Congress.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's really nice to see sort of two parties within the same government that go back and forth a fair bit. Not in quite a two-party system, but similar to Canada, where you have two major parties and several smaller ones cooperating to make sure that their people actually receive really the representation that they're entitled to.
Yeah. It's very different, especially after seeing, the months and weeks following up to not only our own elections, but the elections of our neighbors down south, where there's just constant back and forth of just not niceties.
Yeah, exactly. It's an election that's more based on the issues and on the different strategies to combat them, instead of based on sort of personal issues between the parties and between the candidates.
Yeah. Beyond that, one last thing I'd just like to mention is I just want to congratulate Trinidad and Tobago on their first female president, Paula May Weeks.
Absolutely. And it's worth noting that the leader of the United National Congress once served as their first female prime minister as well.
There we go.
Absolutely.
Progress.
And in our next story, we're coming to more local news back home in Canada, where we have three different stories this week. In the first story, the Conservative Party leadership race came to an end at their convention on August 23rd and 24th. At this point, the race was down to four candidates: Peter MacKay, Aaron O'Toole, Derek Sloan, and Leslyn Lewis. The party reported that despite the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, the level of party engagement was above that of recent years, with 175,000 party members casting votes. This race came in the wake of Andrew Scheer's resignation following the 2019 federal election. Immediately after the election, Scheer announced he intended to remain as leader. However, in the wake of calls from senior party members and an audit that revealed his usage of party funds for personal uses, he chose to step down. The candidates in the race were Peter MacKay, the former leader of the Canadian Alliance, whose party merged with Stephen Harper's Progressive Conservatives to form the current Conservative Party; Aaron O'Toole, a former lawyer and RCAF captain who now represents the riding of Durham, a riding once held by his father, John O'Toole; Leslyn Lewis, who was a close third throughout the race and would have been the first woman of color to lead a major political party; and Derek Sloan, a former lawyer who currently represents the riding of Hastings, Lennox, and Addington. The race experienced difficulties first on June 19th when O'Toole's campaign accused McKay's of attempting to hack confidential data via covert access to Zoom files. The second occurred during ballot counting when counting machines accidentally ripped thousands of ballots that then had to be counted by hand, pushing the reveal of the new party leader back by several hours. Peter MacKay was most commonly polled to win by a comfortable margin, but only managed to pull ahead of O'Toole by a margin of 2% in the first round, a round where Sloan was also eliminated. He fell behind O'Toole by just under 1% in the second round, and then finally lost by a margin of 14% in the third and final round, leading to Aaron O'Toole being crowned the new leader of the Conservative Party. Alrighty, so there's the facts. The one thing that does interest me about this, though, is the thing of a higher level of party engagement in this election than in previous elections. And we've also seen that over in Poland as well, which I find is kind of curious, because you could say it's easier to vote if you're voting digitally or something like that.
No, I've noticed as a trend overall in the last few years that, the newer generation seems to be more and more inspired to step out and speak their voice. Indeed.
And really, when it comes down to it for this election, even though it was just a leadership election in a federal party, it could have sort of long-reaching repercussions one way or another, because there were a lot of people who would, in Canada's habit of going back and forth between Liberal prime ministers and Conservative prime ministers, would almost call, as actually a headline that I saw, I can't remember who printed the article, calling Aaron O'Toole a prime minister in waiting. So really, this election could have repercussions and ripples going forth down the line for close to a decade at this point.
Yeah, easily, depending on how this potential coming up election could be.
Exactly. Through his campaign, Aaron O'Toole did very specifically mention that as a person, he is very strongly pro-choice and very strongly in support of LGBTQ rights and same-sex marriage, which really leads me to hope that maybe Canada is becoming sort of a more centralized politically as a country.
Yeah, I think so. I think so too.
Exactly.
That's great, because seeing stuff like this happen allows party debates to evolve from something like identity politics to something a bit more meaningful, or at least in terms of government.
The one thing about his campaign, apart from being a right-wing campaign, that really does concern me is his slogan of "Take Back Canada." Because, if that doesn't have massive hints of "Make America Great Again," then you're really ignoring the obvious. And that's definitely something, a kind of nationalism, a kind of elitism that we really don't need in Canada under any circumstances. There's no Canada to be taken back from anyone. Canada is in itself a collection of various ideas and ideologies and everything that have to work together. So Take Back Canada is very unnecessarily confrontational in my mind. And I have to say that part of his campaign does worry me quite a bit.
You see one party comes into power, dismantles everything the other party did. And when the next party comes in, they dismantle everything the previous party did.
Yes, exactly. And that's definitely the root of the problem with the two-party system within Canada, and even more within the States and within other places. Because, at least here in Canada, we have the NDP and we have the Greens sort of holding the balance of power. And we have the Bloc Québécois probably does more of that than anything in sort of keeping a hold on both major parties and the amount of seats that they can obtain in Quebec.
So nice to see us as a country moving away from the two-party system.
Yes,
especially in the last election, seeing the smaller parties like the Greens and the Bloc Québécois getting those extra seats.
Listen to over 500 radio stations from anywhere in Canada with Radio Player Canada, the must-have app that's as Canadian as you are. Smart, lovable, easygoing, fits in anywhere. From early morning hockey practices to late night after parties. Enjoy every type of radio station, anywhere, anytime. Listen through your phone, Sonos, Google Chromecast, Google Home, Amazon Echo, Apple CarPlay, and Android Auto. Download the Radio Player Canada app today. It's where Canadian radio plays.
There are some things that just resonate with us Newfoundlanders, like moose hunting.
Got to get me moose, boy!
A little nip of screech.
Yes, Lord!
And even going on the pogey.
And it's you I see, standing in the long line.
But there's one thing that every Newfoundlander can't resist on a Sunday afternoon, and that's a big feed of Jig's Dinner. Tune in to 93.5 CHMR FM every Sunday at 1 p.m. for Jig's Dinner. Join your host, Roland Skinner, as he serves up a deliciously diverse menu of Newfoundland traditional, country, and folk tunes to feed your Sunday afternoon music cravings. That's Jig's Dinner, every Sunday at 1 p.m. and only on 93.5 CHMR FM.
Providing airtime to independent artists everywhere. CHMR FM.
Our next story on the docket today is that of the Green Party leadership election. They are scheduled to hold their convention on October 4th in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island, to elect a new leader to replace Elizabeth May, who has been their leader since 2006. And with that story, we've got Johnny Robertson.
Thanks, Charlie. Green Party leader Elizabeth May announced her resignation on November 4th, 2019, after 13 years at the helm of the party. During May's tenure, the party rose from the extra-parliamentary status it had occupied since its inception in 1983 to the fifth party with a presence in Parliament. May became the first elected Green after successfully securing a seat for herself in 2011, successfully defended it in 2015, and saw the Greens caucus rise to 3 seats in 2019 with the elections of Paul Manley in BC and Jenica Atwin in New Brunswick. There are currently 9 hopefuls in the leadership race, with the cutoff for confirmed candidacy being September 1st. The hopefuls come from 5 provinces and the Northwest Territories. The candidates all run on slightly different platforms, but all share central themes of combating climate change, movement to renewable energy, securing Indigenous rights, and expansion of further social programs to better protect Canadians. This morning, we sat down with Judy N. Green, a leadership candidate from Nova Scotia who appeared as the Greens candidate on the ballot for West Nova in the 2019 election.
How are you doing today, Judy?
I'm doing fabulous. How are you doing today, Charlie?
Doing very well.
Good, good.
Alrighty, now, Johnny, I believe that these first few questions we had for Judy were 2 of yours, so why don't we swing things over your way, and let's get this rolling.
Yeah, sure thing. So just to start off the interview here, we'd love to hear some of your thoughts on the current Green Party leadership race. What are your feelings about the potential candidates and just some of the other situations surrounding the race.
Sure. It's been quite an interesting, I keep saying that I couldn't have paid for this education. It's been fabulous. And when we decided to join the leadership race, at first it was a $50,000 buy-in, which of course I'm not a person of means. I would have to raise every penny of it. And my team sat down and says, well, let's just go for it, see how far we can get. And the benefits are that we will get to reach out to Greens all across Canada, really get to be solid on all of the Green Party policy, learn new things, and create a web of communication between the EDAs. And that's, I think, the most critical thing that our team has been able to do during this the leadership contest. This episode's going to air after the second deadline, where we need $20,000 right now. We're doing like a Hail Mary pass and hoping we hit that target, but we may not. So I may not be in the race when this episode airs, but we will be already ramping up to be running to be the candidate here in West Nova. So our team, I might let them have a week or so to catch their breath, and then we'll be hitting the ground running again. Like, honestly, I've been campaigning since spring of last year with that last general election, and then a couple of months of working behind the scenes with the Green Party, and then moving forward. But I do want to say that our candidates that are currently in the race, we have 9 right now. I am so impressed with absolutely every one of my leadership, fellow leadership candidates. I want to see us all in the House of Parliament. And that is our goal, is to get all of us elected, including our 3 MPs that are already in the House, so that we get 12 MPs, at least 12 MPs in the next election, which could be as early as the spring. Some people are saying this fall. We're going hold off till the spring. Give us a chance to catch our breath. But I am so proud of the quality of the candidates. We're learning so much from each other, and all of us are following the green principles. And the race is so much different than what we see in other leadership contests and other parties. I'm very proud to be a part of it.
That's really great to hear, Judy. Glad to hear everything's going pretty well so far for the green leadership race so far. Funny you should mention the green principles. Actually, the next question I had for you was, in your opinion, what are some of the most important issues the Green Party is focusing on right now?
Well, our green principles are values. The term gets used interchangeably, but they are principles. It's like a foundation, and then you that are built atop your values. But the green principles actually come from the Global Green Charter. Many people don't realize that we have Green Party members elected in over 80 countries around the world, many of them holding the balance of power. And so the Green Party is unique in that we have that global green connection with people all around the world. And so we collaborate greatly in terms of working together on global issues like climate change. So the values, there really isn't one or two that are the most important. They act more like filters or tests that all of our policies and our decisions have to pass that milestone of that post. So if something is a great idea, but it doesn't address diversity, or it goes against a principle of diversity, well, then we would change it so that it did address the principle of diversity. Or if something was not an ecologically wise decision to do, well, then we would have to adjust that decision or that policy so that it was ecologically wise. So it is our guiding principles, truly, that. And that's one of the things that really attracted me to the Green Party, is this ethical underpinning of these very clearly defined rules upon which we operate.
Thank you very much. So I'll pass it on to Charlie here. He's got a couple more questions for you.
Alrighty.
Charlie, you ready to take it away?
Absolutely. First off, I'd just like to say that's one of the things that I absolutely love about the Green Party, is sort of the whole global view of it, because there's still too many political parties, not just in Canada, but everywhere on Earth, I find, that are sort of too obsessed with the individual pixels that they don't look at the big picture, and there's no other way to do it these days in today's world. So actually, my question, first one, is moving forward into the future. What is your vision for the Green Party's future?
Well, first I want to say you're absolutely correct, Charlie, is that we really do have to look at the larger view. Like, we are complex beings living in a very complex world, and yet it's natural for our human tendency to try to simplify things. Unfortunately, it doesn't serve us. We end up with Band-Aids. We don't end up with solutions. And so we really need to look, have our eyes to the future, watching what the experts are saying is going to happen if this isn't done or this is done, and really looking at that future, having a clearly defined goal, a vision of the future that we want to move towards. And of course, that is a green recovery, it's a sustainable environment, it is equity for all people across the world, clean water for our First Nations communities in Canada. We have to be top on human rights, and we're not. We have a lot of work to do here in our own backyard. So it's really critical that we have that forward-looking view, but we also have to look at what is causing the problems, or what has caused the problems. Like, I'm a computer scientist, and I know how to troubleshoot. I've also worked as an aircraft mechanic in the Canadian military, so troubleshooting is very ingrained. And part of that is what we call upstream thinking. So if you see a problem, you need to follow it back to its source. And when we do that, we find that a lot of the problems are systemic problems that are going to take 30, 40, 50 generations to fix. But we have to invest, and the math on it, when we look at investing in it, will actually cost us less in the long run. Just on a purely monetary basis, would cost us less in the long run than it would to keep going status quo. So some of those are guaranteed livable incomes to raise people out of poverty, housing, affordable housing for people, decriminalizing opioids, so that instead of incarcerating people, which can cost us over $100,000 a year, we're paying $30,000 or $40,000 a year to get them in a program that helps them, deal with their medical condition of addiction, and really addressing things at the root cause so we can eliminate that problem. It's and those types of situations, it goes back to policing as well, where we need to be looking at community-based policing and dealing with the issues within the communities that are making people turn to crime. Because just stats and common sense tells us that given two roads, who wants to choose a road of crime unless that's the only option they feel is available to them? And that's generally the case. You are always going to need a strategic strike force to be able to deal with truly violent and crime, because that will always be part of our society, always has been, but not to the degree that we have now. There's so much that we could be, especially where there's a disparity between Black, Indigenous, and people of color in terms of looking at what percentage they are of our population versus what percentage they are of our incarcerated population. So we really need to be addressing those, and we don't do that with a Band-Aid. We don't do that with a solution that's fixed in 4 years. And that's what the problem with our current political system is that politicians only look at what they can do in 4 years in one mandate. So we need to find a way that we can work across party lines on issues like this that are really talking about the foundational underpinnings of our society, so that we can come together with a solution that's going to work for all parties, lock it in so that we don't have policy churn in the next election. Because as you've probably noticed, and I've been very frustrated with, is that when one party leaves, the first thing the next party does is undo all the good things the party before it did. And that has to stop. That's really holding Canada back, because we're taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back, sometimes 3 steps back. So we really have to look at what's in the best interests of Canada and our people, who I do believe is our most important natural resource in Canada, is our people.
Absolutely. And when it comes to terms like with Indigenous policy and whatnot, I find one of the biggest problems in the government, just on a bipartisan basis, is almost every party over a period of hundreds of years at this point has become entirely comfortable with the concept of Freximania, which is just being more prepared for a policy to fail and being prepared to explain it than actually think outside the box and come up with something different. And a lot of this stuff, a lot of people come up with the idea of, oh, well, it could work or it could work. And the thing is, none of this is theoretical. You just have to look at other countries that have done this, and the statistical data is all there, particularly with climate change. And that's one thing that always gets to me when people are talking about it, is it's, oh, well, this could happen and this could happen and this could happen. And it's happening right now. And personally, in my field, where it's dealing with archaeology a lot in the South Pacific, we are literally in the end game for entire nations across the South Pacific that are expected to be totally underwater as soon as within our own lifetimes, almost by the year about 2080 or 2100. And that actually leads me into my next question for you, which is, what would you say are the best things that people can do in their daily lives to help mitigate climate change?
Excellent. Well, that's actually one of the reasons that got me into politics, is I was giving the talks for Extinction Rebellion, the Heading Towards Extinction, where I was able to do a deep dive into the climate change science, which I find absolutely fascinating and horrifying at the same time, because as the curtains are pulled back and you start to see what many have seen for literally decades, and the mainstream media and the average Canadian has been totally deaf to, is that we knew this was coming. We know what we need to do to stop it, and we still insist on not stopping it. So in the last election, I was asked what the greatest political challenge was, and I said lack of political will, because there are so many other pressures on politicians that if they are not completely ingrained in understanding the true realities of civilizations underwater, if we don't make these changes, they are not going to have the strength to stand up to the corporations and the lobbying that needs to be done. And so that's where I took the step from working outside the system, which we absolutely still need to do because that raises awareness and shifts the Overton window. But we need to be having people in politics who already get it. Stop electing people and then thinking you can change their minds. That doesn't work. You know, as you said, let's look at the history. What's worked, what hasn't? That hasn't worked. So we need to be having people like yourselves step up and say, I understand this. This is what needs to be done. We know, we have a plan. Let's get to it and get yourselves elected, because we don't have time to be convincing people who think otherwise. We simply don't. And as much as we have conflicting crises right now, you know, we have the very imminent COVID-19, and then we have the economic crisis, and then we have the climate crisis, which really overshadows all. And you think it's gone away, but it hasn't. It's been gaining speed. And what's really terrifying me is that some of the feedback loops are happening much faster than predicted. You know, there's a lot about this science that we're learning as we go, because it's never happened before. We've never had an example like this that we can draw on. We're learning as we go. Somebody said it's like you're flying in the aircraft as you're building it at the same time. And that's much the same as what's happening with understanding COVID-19. So we have to have a better understanding of how science works. And then it's not about facts. It's about, given the knowledge and understanding that we have at this point in time, this is what we believe to be true. But in the face of additional information as it comes in, that position will change. And it's not until hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years before things truly become fact. Like gravity is now fact, right? But it wasn't at first. You know, the fact that the earth revolves around the sun was not a fact at first. You know, it takes time. And a lot of people don't understand that. And the media really doesn't help, because in trying to give both sides of an argument, they have given legitimacy to climate change deniers that they don't deserve, because they've had the opportunity to question their concerns during the scientific process and the peer review process. And those issues have been debunked over and over and over and over and over again. But because most people are not reading scientific journals, then they listen to the media that once again gives voice to these opinions that have already been debunked. And so the average citizens just ends up being confused, you know, and being told, oh, you have to have a radical lifestyle change. Well, you know, at this point in time, if every person on the earth started recycling and started reducing the amount of energy, did all the things they were supposed to do, it would pale in comparison to the, like 100 companies that are producing 70% of the greenhouse gas emissions. The only tool we now have in our toolbox is to get politicians in place who can put the sanctions on these companies to make them stop. And that's the bottom line. And that's really the biggest and most effective tool that we have in order to effect the change in the time we have left to accomplish that.
Absolutely. And the fact of the matter is, there, with a lot of politicians getting elected, they're getting elected with the intention of getting reelected, and therefore trying to stay popular among the powerful and the elite. And the problem is, at this point in time, there isn't time to be popular. There isn't time to be universally liked. Anyone that ends up in office needs to understand that the right choice is not necessarily the easy choice. It is not necessarily the popular choice, and realize that it's no longer about just being a career politician of, oh, they're going to get into this and retire with a nice pension. It's a case of life and death in many ways.
It is indeed, exactly. And I'm not a career politician. It's so funny. My people on my campaign keep saying I'm an accidental politician. It's like, I didn't choose politics, it chose me. Because in order to affect the change that I know we have to have, this is the only path I could see. And I have 3 grandchildren. In 10 years, they are going to ask me, didn't you see what was coming? And if you did, what did you do about it? And I'm going to tell them I fought for every single step of the way and did everything I could. And whether I become leader of the Green Party of Canada, whether I get elected in West Nova, I will continue to fight in absolutely every way that I can to affect the change that we have to save civilization as we know it. And that is no longer hyperbole. That is the fact. As you said, we may not be underwater, but other civilizations are going to be underwater. We have a global responsibility to our global brothers and sisters to ensure that our actions are not negatively affecting them. And we have to own that in the developed countries, in the Western countries. We have lived a life of privilege and abundance, mainly on the back, the carbon back of people who are going to actually lose their homes and their whole way of living.
Absolutely, and that's what people that come in and say, oh, well, it doesn't affect them or it doesn't affect anyone that they know in particular. It doesn't matter. The one common universal human feel here is none of us can breathe underwater.
Exactly. Exactly. Absolutely. And none of us can exist on a planet that is above a certain temperature.
Exactly.
The food we rely on, the species of fish that we rely on, all of those are changing and we're losing them. The biodiversity loss that we've had in my lifetime is just unimaginable, and it's not slowing down. And we have to change it, and we can't do it through incrementalism. We need bold, decisive action, and we really need the people who marched in the streets last year, and I was among them, the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands who marched for climate, the Fridays for Futures, all of them. We need their voices in government, which means we need them to vote. First off, in the Green Party leadership elections, people as young as 14 can be members and can vote for the leader. So you can get involved in politics quite early. Join an election, a campaign team in your local area for the party that really resonates with you, who has strong policies on climate action. And we would embrace you. You have no idea how much we would embrace you in our campaign teams. We need to learn from you, and you would be learning some amazing skills in terms of project management, in terms of working with others, team building, and public speaking that you may not get in other ways. So it's a wonderful way for youth to be able to flesh out their resumes as well. And you meet some amazing people all across Canada. And so it's a win-win circumstance. And when we're working together on something as critical as this, we have a passion of that shared vision. We can have a lot of fun along the way as well.
Absolutely. And speaking on behalf of Johnny and myself, there is no downside to getting involved in business or politics or anything in the wider world at a younger age. Like we actually met in a junior achievement program in Nova Scotia when we were, I think, 15.
15, 14, yeah.
15, 14, yeah. Anyway, it looks like we're at about the end of our time here. So we want to thank you again, Judy, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed this chat, and I love the energy that you guys are bringing to this.
Thank you.
I wish you the best.
Thank you. We'll have to have you back on at some point in the future.
Absolutely.
We'd love to have you again.
Anytime.
Absolutely. All right. Okay. Thanks again, Judy.
You betcha. Bye for now. Thanks, everyone, for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All righty, ladies and gentlemen. That was Judy N. Green from the West Nova riding for the Green Party and in their leadership race.
And just a reminder, the cutoff to become a member of the Green Party to vote in the leadership election is 11:59 on September 3rd. Links will be available on the Flea Market Productions Instagram.
And in our last story from here in the Great White North, New Brunswick's currently gearing up for a general election. The general election was originally scheduled to take place in October of 2022. However, a snap election was called on August 17th by Premier Blaine Higgs. The 2018 election was definitely a complex one, resulting in New Brunswick's first minority government since 1920. The Conservative Party secured 22 seats in the election, one more than the Liberals at 21. Blaine Higgs declared victory. However, then Premier Brian Gallant elected to meet with the Lieutenant Governor and received permission to attempt to form a minority government and seek the confidence of the legislature. Gallant's minority government was defeated in a vote of no confidence on November 2nd, with Blaine Higgs being sworn in as Premier 1 week later. The election also raised the number of parties in the legislature to 4, with the People's Alliance securing 3 seats and the Greens raising their number of seats from 1 to 3. Speculation of an early election began in September of 2019 after the death of St. Croix MLA Greg Thompson lowered the PC seat count to 21 and left a vacant seat. It was furthered by the departure of Robert Galvin, MLA from Shippagan-Lamecmiscou, in February over his disapproval of a conservative health reform that included the nightly closing of emergency rooms. Galvin continued serving as an independent and is now running as Liberal candidate for Shediac Bay Dieppe. A vote of no confidence was originally scheduled to take place on March 20th, with the Conservatives likely to lose by a 23-25 margin identical to Gallant's loss, thanks to only having support from the People's Alliance. Higgs began hinting at a fall election in the early summer, stating that a stable government was needed for the next phase of pandemic recovery. He made an offer to the opposition to postpone an election until 2022, but when negotiations failed, the writs of election were issued. The candidates in this race are incumbent Premier Blaine Higgs, who first served in the government of David Alward as finance minister from 2010 to 2014, Kevin Vickers, Liberal leader since April 2019. Vickers does not currently have a seat in the legislature, but is running in his hometown of Miramichi. Vickers is retired RCMP with 29 years of experience, rising to the rank of chief superintendent. He gained prominence as incident commander during the Burnt Church crisis, becoming the Director General of the RCMP's Indigenous Police Services branch, and he gained international recognition as the Sergeant-at-Arms who incapacitated the 2014 Parliament Hill shooter who had previously killed Corporal Nathan Carrillo. He later served as the ambassador to Ireland. Other candidates are David Kuhn of the Greens, Chris Austin of the People's Alliance, and Mackenzie Thomason of the NDP. The election is scheduled for September 14th and predicted to be a close race between the incumbent PC and the Liberals. So, an election in New Brunswick, I don't think that's really much of a surprise to anyone, given that the 2018 election was a little bit of a mess, to say the least. I remember hearing the news reports about it on the radio back right when it was happening.
Oh, yeah. It's been a very turbulent few years politically for the province here.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I do believe a change in leadership would be a good thing for them. And though I've never been a fan of Blaine Higgs, I do have to say I do respect his decision to say, okay, look, we need stability in order to move forward from the various crises we've gone through. If we can't come to an agreement, let's have an election to figure out what we need to do, make sure that we have the government that we need in order to get everything through for the people.
Oh yeah, at least his intentions were in the right place.
Yeah, exactly. And definitely, as for Kevin Vickers, I will admit I had not heard his name before I started researching this episode, but that man has definitely led an interesting life.
Just a little bit.
Yeah. And
the Hemingway of our time.
Yeah. And then with the Burnt Church crisis, that was, I don't know if you're familiar with the Burnt Church crisis, but that was back in 1999 and 2000. And it was a disagreement between the federal government and various indigenous groups in northern New Brunswick that was centered around the lobster fishery. And it's actually where the law in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick came from, that indigenous fishermen are permitted to fish out of season for sustenance. And in that case, I was kind of leery, I should say, about Kevin Vickers first reading that, based on the fact that he was instant commander, and Lord knows Indigenous communities and the RCMP have not always had the best relations.
I would even say never really.
Yeah. But then
if you look into the RCMP's, reason why they were founded in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. But then I decided to do some digging actually about that, because I wanted to know, well, if I'm gonna express support for this guy on the radio, I definitely want to know more about him. And what I found was specifically during the Burnt Church crisis, several people on both sides of the debate actually said he was one of the most reasonable people involved with it. The various community leaders in the Indigenous community. What they said about him literally had nothing but good things to say about him, saying, well, he would absolutely never use force unless it was life or death, knew everybody involved by their first names. If there was something going on down at the wharf that they needed an extra set of hands, he would be the first one walking in to do anything. And that, to me, that is really what a political candidate should be. They should be the first one into every situation. They should be the voice of reason when everything's getting tense. And to me, that really sounds like what Mr. Vickers is.
Sounds like someone I'd vote for.
Yeah, exactly. And then also when you come down to the Parliament Hill shootings, it really gives you a sense that he's been in that situation. He sort of understands and has personally experienced the idea of having to make a split-second decision that has really long-reaching ramifications.
Yeah. And handle it with a level of tact.
Yeah, handle it with a level of tact and a cool head in order to actually diffuse the situation as necessary. Definitely makes me think that he would be a very good leader for New Brunswick moving forward.
Yeah, especially with such a turbulent time as now.
Yeah, exactly.
Between politically in New Brunswick as well as the current ongoing pandemic.
Well, that's about all the time that we've got today. We want to thank you for joining us on the show today, and hopefully we'll see you again on the next one.
Yeah. If you like what we did today, feel free to check out our other series also airing on this station. It's called News of the Weird. And if you're looking for some more information and some updates on other shows or other potential series, check out our Instagram. It's Flea Market Productions, one word, lowercase.
Have a good day, everybody.
Take care.